Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest back on for the second time, Dr. Jose Antonio. He was actually on when you were one of my first guests, actually, back in episode 8. So we're in the 400s now. So it's been a while. I think it was like 2020 when we had you on and we talked about, you guessed it, protein, believe it or not, back then. But if you aren't familiar with Dr. Antonio, he's a co-founder and CEO of the ISSN, and he's done multiple research papers, especially like we said around protein. So Dr. Antonio, thanks for coming back on.
Hey, it's a pleasure. I always like talking about this stuff. I always say science tells the best stories, and I'm sure I have plenty of stories to tell you.
Yeah.
So thanks for re-inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, it's been, I think, 2020. So what's been going on in your world since that time?
Yeah, wow, 2020. So that was the COVID year where I was actually, what's interesting about that year, living in Florida was so different than living in other states.
Yeah.
Because Florida really didn't shut down. I was actually one of the few individuals that still held an in-person conference. I said, there's nothing stopping me. I'm going to help. Hey, 5 people show up, 5 people show up. And about 100 people showed up, which is fine. But I refused to let change my life. It just didn't make sense to me, but that's a different discussion. But really, since then, I've been focusing quite a bit on research and teaching. I'm still at Nova Southeastern University. I'm in the Department of Health and Human Performance and the Exercise Science program, mentoring undergrad as well as master's level students, and then occasional PhD students. And of course, ISSN, we're in our 21st year, and next year, 2025, we will be in Delray Beach, beautiful venue for anyone who knows South Florida. Delray Beach is there's Atlantic Boulevard, that road there. There's so many restaurants, and the hotel's right on A1A, which is right next to the ocean. Absolute beautiful venue. Setting that up and been doing it for, this will be the 22nd year. It's crazy. It's when we first started ISSN, the people who attended, they eventually got PhDs, and now their students are attending ISSN, which is really crazy. It's why we've been at this a long time. It means I'm getting old, or everyone's getting young, or something's happening. So that's in a nutshell what I've been keeping myself busy with. It's the life of a scientist. Sports scientist.
Hey, it sounds fun. And yeah, for anybody who's listening, Dr. Antonio and I were talking off air about the ISSN conference. I love it. I haven't been able to go to the last couple of years, but I do love it. I think it's a great conference, and always make sure you have like free coffee there as well too, which is awesome. But always the information is fantastic. And then obviously the networking and getting to know everyone too is also super cool. And then on top of it, right next to a beach, so makes it even better.
Yes. Yeah, next year, just so you know, a little plug, it's June 23 to 25. It is a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday schedule. So that's June 23, 25, Delray Beach, Florida. You can register for it. I know it's a little early, but ISSN.net, that's INET. And again, I've been to many science conferences. Jeff, I don't know how many you've attended, but when I was in school, think about this. I was an undergrad and grad student in the 80s and 90s. I attended a whole lot of different kinds of conferences: American College of Sports Medicine, National Strength and Conditioning Association, the Endocrine Society, FASEB. At the time, it was called the American Dietetic Association. Now it's called the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. I attended so many different kinds, and I'll tell you what the common theme was. Want to know what the common theme was, Jeff?
I do.
They were boring as shit. I'm like, this is so boring. There's got to be a way to make conferences fun. And I think part of it is, people are going to hate me, it's the people who attend. And I think one of the commonalities of when people go to the ISSN conference, they're like, wow, everyone seems really friendly, and they just want to share information and talk about, what do we talk about, Jeff? Training and nutrition, wait, this is what I do every day. Now I'm here, and there's all these people who like the same things, and everyone is so open and willing to share information. Whereas on other conferences, it's for, use the analogy, it's a dick measuring contest. It's who's the smartest one in the room. Let's see if I can tear this person down and show how stupid they are. And it's just not like that at ISSN. People are friendly, people are nice. And in fact, advice to those of you who are thinking of going into science, PhD, or even if you want to go into medicine, if you just offered to buy someone a beer and say, hey, I'll buy a beer, and can I ask you a few questions about med school or grad school? 99.9% of people at ISSN be like, sure, buy me 3 beers and I'll tell you everything you need to know. So the culture of the conference is just a lot different, and rarely go to other conferences, if at all, anymore. It's just, if I need to find information, I'll either email that person, I'll send a text, or I'm rarely on the phone. I don't like talking on the phone, to be honest. But I'll just contact them directly, or I'll say, hey, come to ISSN and let's talk. The other thing is, and what's cool about the podcast business, Jeff, is it gives you an opportunity to talk to someone more than 5 or 10 seconds, where you
Yeah.
might see someone at a conference. Hey, how you doing? What's new? And then 60 seconds later, you got to go somewhere else. The great thing about podcasts is you could meet a lot of people, have pretty good conversations, and you don't feel compelled that you have to steal someone for 5 or 10 minutes at a conference. And it's hard to do when people are just running around all over the place.
And for the podcast too, going to these events also gives me some ideas of people to reach out to and have on the podcast too. And then, like you said, if you're there, it's like you only have maybe a couple minutes, whereas here you get a long time. What I also like about the ISSN too, it was actually the first kind of conference I went to from like a fitness nutrition standpoint. So you set the bar high there. Is I feel like with the conference, it's like it's not too big to where there's so many people there, and you guys have one speaker at a time. And so it's not too small, but it's also not too big either, right? To where I think it's the perfect size for what you talked about there of making it fun, but also very informational as well too, educational.
Yeah, because some conferences, like for instance, the Society for Neuroscience, it's a walking city. It's 30 to 40,000 people. And that's not even a conference. That's just you visiting a city.
Right.
That's no fun. And when I was going through grad school, it's funny that what you echoed about the size of the conference. I attended the primary conferences I attended was the American College of Sports Medicine, their national meeting, but they also had regional events, and they still do that. They have small regional events. And I found that when I went to the smaller events of a couple hundred, maybe 300 people, I'm like, I actually like this better because no one's in a rush. You can talk to people. But when you go to something that has 2 or 3 people, it's like, it's just ants crawling all over the place. And it's, this isn't for me. But for some people, maybe they like going to a city. It's, hey, 30,000 people attended neuroscience. That's not my cup of tea.
In this period of time over the last little bit, in terms of like research and stuff like that, is there anything that you've been really focused on? Has there been maybe like kind of a couple favorite papers that you've had come out of your own or anything like that over the last few years?
We've done several energy drink studies. We do that because they're fairly easy to do. And there's 5 trillion different energy drinks that are in the market. So literally, if anyone needs an idea for a master's thesis, do something on energy drinks, because like you go on Amazon and you just type in energy drinks and they're out the wazoo. But really 2 interesting studies we've done recently. And I think it might have been the last year. Yeah, last year. And what's interesting about some of the work we do is sometimes I feel like I'm wasting my time. That sounds really weird, but when I say wasting my time, I'm thinking, in fact, let's harken back to 2014 when we did the first high protein diet study. In my mind, I'm like, okay, this is really dumb, but why am I doing it? Because there are people out there who, for whatever reason, think eating a lot of protein is bad for your kidneys, that think if you eat a lot of protein, it's a way to get fat. And you and I know, if humans, we recognize patterns. If you see people eating a lot of protein who also work out a lot, you don't see many fat ones. In fact, if your goal is to be fat, eating protein is not the way to get fat. You want to get fat, eat carbs and fat. So that's why I did the initial protein studies. Obviously, we found no harmful effects. And all my friends are like, well, of course. I'm like, yeah, of course. But to this day, people still say it's bad for your kidneys, it makes you fat, whatever. So fast forward to now. Why did we do studies on Tongkat Ali? It's a testosterone booster. And we just wrapped one up, submitted it for publication on Turkesterone or Turkesterone, depending on how you promote it. Both are touted as testosterone boosters. It can help body composition, et cetera, et cetera. Tongkat Ali, also known as Long Jack, there's actually some data on it, but if you look at the data carefully and you look at how it's marketed, it's completely different things. The data, at least in older hypogonadal males, it does show it might increase testosterone. However, I've always argued that the amount it increases isn't physiologically significant. If you want to increase, if you're an older male and you're low testosterone, you need TRT. Right. Either get pellets, injections, creams, whatever. Talk to your physician. Taking Tongkat Ali is not going to do that. The problem is Tongkat Ali is marketed towards young males between age 18 and 35, the demographic in which it will do absolutely nothing. So were there any studies on Tongkat Ali in young, healthy people? No. So we decided to do one, knowing full well it's not going to do anything. Like, why do we do this? We do it because you still need data. So we did it, found nothing, no change in body comp, no change in anything. Okay, not surprising. All my friends in the sports science world were like, well, of course. No one thinks it'll do anything except the people who claim it'll do stuff on social media. The other one, Turkesterone or Turkesterone. We did that as well. Was there any human data on it? No. And I'm like, well, how do people make these claims with literally zero human data? There's rodent data, and translation from rodent data to human data is problematic. for a number of reasons. And it's not that I'm anti-animal data, because for my doctoral dissertation, I used animal models. I'm acutely aware of the limitations of going from animal to human. For exercise stuff, I think animal to human is fairly consistent. If you run a rat on a treadmill, the adaptations at the level of skeletal muscle are similar to what you find in humans. If you get a rat or a cat or even a bird, I use birds as my model. If you get them to lift weights, the adaptations are similar to what you might find in humans. Now, when it comes to nutrition or supplements, this is where I'm a lot more skeptical. And in a way, like I say, humans, we look for patterns. I ask people, if you have a pet dog or a pet cat, do you feed your pet dog or pet cat the same thing you feed yourself? And the answer is, of course, it's always no. So why would you expect a human to respond to something you ingest the same way you'd expect a rat, a cat, or a dog? And the answer is you wouldn't. And that's why a lot of the nutrition and supplement data, when I see it in an animal model, I've gotten to the point where a lot of times I just ignore it. I'm like, okay, whatever. I need to see a human study in humans. So with turkesterone, we did that 4 weeks. We DEXA'd people. Again, the caveat is these are young, healthy people who exercise. We found nothing. Of course, all my friends are like, of course, you're not going to find anything. I'm like, I know. But the problem is we got people on social media making claims that somehow, and in fact, one of them was, well, turkesterone is like DECA. I'm like, no, it's not. No, it's not. So that turkesterone study, that hopefully it should be published maybe in a month. The Tonkat Ali one is already published. So those two it's really born out of my frustration for the silly claims that are made online. And the challenge is this, there's so many people online now. And I'm a big fan of social media. I think it's a great tool, but it's also a great tool for giving stupid information. And you just got to, if you're a consumer, you just got to figure out how to sift through the stupid information, find the right information. And that's not easy. It really is. I have friends who are non-scientists, relatives who are non-scientists, and they'll ask me, they're like, they'll send me some random thing on Instagram. They're like, is this true? And 99% of the time, I'm like, no, this is just BS. It's gross exaggeration, or it's just plain wrong. So I'm thinking, if I were in their shoes, how would you figure this stuff out? And the answer is you wouldn't. You really wouldn't. And I think that's the problem. But those two studies on, quote, testosterone boosters those are some of the ones we focus on, at least in the last year. Maybe there's another so-called T booster that we could do a study on. But the thing is, whenever you're dealing with these tiny blips in testosterone, hey, testosterone goes up 10 to 20% after you do aerobic exercise. Okay, yeah, sure. Oh, testosterone goes up 10 to 20% after you lift weights. I'm like, yeah, it doesn't matter. Physiologically, it's meaningless. If you want testosterone to have the effect that you think it has, i.e. it's anabolic and it promotes an increase in skeletal muscle mass, you want it to be quite high for an extended period of time, i.e. you take exogenous anabolic steroids. That's the only, or any kind of androgen that is anabolic. So that was a long-winded way of saying I did some T booster stuff.
No, I'm glad you brought those up because those are common things, right? Like people will look for that, oh, Tonkat Ali, and then like they're overlooking, like you said, for some people, it's, hey, maybe you need to get on TRT if you're older. But also they're also probably overlooking the main things like, again, body fat levels, sleep, stress, right? Like they're probably overlooking those things and trying to like find that kind of magic pill. And it's okay, that's just not out there. Those are going to be your kind of big rocks that you need to focus on first.
Yeah, the things that move the needle, and you and I know this, it's the repetitive stuff we do. You train and you do it consistently, and you might vary it a little bit depending on what you're training for. Sleep, you got to make sure you're getting consistent and regular sleep. Nutrition has to be dialed in. And it's not like you're eating this great variety of foods. You could literally eat the same foods day in, day out, but as long as it meets the needs of your body, that's fine. And then there's a few supplements that might help depending on whether you're training for physique or training for performance. I think there are certain ones that are important for those who do performance sports, i.e. run, bike, swim, lift. For physique sports, it's a little different because the goal is really to look pretty. And that's looking pretty in your underwear on stage is not technically performing. It's creating this illusion based on how you diet a few days and weeks before. Yeah, you got to be specific to the goal of the person.
With that, you mentioned like certain supplements. Were you just saying for like testosterone in particular, or just in terms of enhancing physique and enhancing performance?
Oh, I'm talking about in a general sense, enhancing physique or performance. I think the challenge in our category, particularly when you're looking at social media posts or information about particularly supplements, it almost always comes from a bodybuilding perspective. And most people are not bodybuilders. In fact, if you go to any college campus, the athletes you run into are typically trying to do well in a sport. So doing well in a sport and looking pretty are not the same thing. Although a lot of people who do sports want to look pretty while they do it. But if you're the coach, you're like, I don't give a shit how you look. You better run fast. You better lift a lot of weight or something. You better hit that ball as far as possible. I don't care if you have belly fat, but if you can hit that ball 400 feet, then you're going to make the coach happy.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like you said, we do need to separate them and what is the goal versus, oh, hey, this is one that you need to take and whatnot.
And I do want to comment, sorry, the idea of, you see this in exercise training. I've always felt that if you're going to, when you work with athletes, it's always goal specific. If your goal is to lift heavier weights, powerlifting meet, training should be specific to that. What I'm noticing though, is that people are trying to convince you that it should also be gender or sex specific. And there's just not enough data for that. And I always take the simplest sport, distance running. If you're coaching guys and girls, they're doing the same kinds of training depending on what fitness level they are. They're still doing long, slow distance or long distance. They're still doing intervals. They're still doing sprint interval training. They're still lifting weights. It's the goal that determines the training strategy. It's not sex or gender. And I see this, I'm like, I just don't see the data where I'm going to alter the way I would train someone because they're female. The data is just not there. And then from a pragmatic standpoint, this is where then they completely lose me. Women can't decide when they compete. It's if you're competing, track meet, MMA, pick the sport, the date is determined by someone else. And regardless of where you are in your cycle, you got to do well. So when you train during those periods of times, whether you feel like shit or you feel good, pragmatically, it doesn't matter. You train based on the goal.
Yeah, you got to train for the goal. And again, like you said, gender really shouldn't make a difference there with that. As far as like supplements go, real quick, do you have like a kind of foundational like few that you just recommend to everybody, even if it is like, hey, performance, like just health? Is there anything like that you're like, all right, these are the ones that I think based on the research, it's pretty safe for most people that they should take?
Yeah, and I'll tell you my it's not really my bias, but who I'm around most are people who perform and not bodybuilders. Oddly enough, my focus when I was in grad school was bodybuilding in terms of nutrition and science. But there are 5 that I would recommend, and then there's some honorable mention. One, and some people would say it's not a supplement, but I would say dietary protein in the form of whey protein or whatever, mainly because it's a convenient way to get protein because you're not going to be eating chicken breast all day, and it's gross anyways. Eat chicken broccoli every meal. So protein, particularly whey protein, whether it's pre or post exercise. Creatine, it's good for the brain, good for skeletal muscle. It helps you work out. It helps you train harder. Also beta alanine. Now beta alanine for some athletes are useless. If you play baseball, it's useless. But for sports that produce a lot of lactate and promote acidity in muscle, beta alanine is great. Caffeine's another one. Caffeine probably helps everything. And whether you're on the endurance side, whether you're on the strength power side, I recommend caffeine. Another one which a lot of people don't really pay attention to is nitrates, or in the form of beets or beetroot juice. The data on that is actually interesting in that it looks like it'll help primarily those in the endurance events because it helps O2 delivery to skeletal muscle. Obviously, would that be important for someone training for a bodybuilding show? It might help you train harder, maybe. It's hard to measure bodybuilding training per se because you're not performing something. But my attitude with supplements, and I've had this going back to is this. I follow the maxim of if it helps or has a neutral effect, you should try it. And all of those are going to help. Now, people say caffeine, you could overdose. Yeah, caffeine, you could overdose, but hopefully no one's stupid enough to take grams of it versus milligrams. But all of those things can help. And the worst thing that happen is nothing happens. Now, some honorable mentions. What about vitamin D? It's certainly true that if you're deficient, it might impair performance, but also it might be bad for your health, increased risk of cancers, cardiovascular disease, etc. So supplementing with it may bring you up to normal, but anything above that probably doesn't do anything. Living in South Florida, I don't really worry about it. I don't take vitamin D supplements because I basically am outside every day, actually, unless it's raining or something, or there's a hurricane. So I get plenty of vitamin D from the sun. Other honorable, there's a lot of other ones, like for instance, sodium bicarbonate, sodium phosphate. It's great for athletes that are engaged in sports that are highly anaerobic. People may not use it because of the GI distress. Branched chain amino acids. There's one that actually gets beat up a lot on social media. And it's really interesting because the data on branched chain amino acids decreasing delayed onset muscle soreness, there's actually quite a few studies on it. And Would it apply to bodybuilding? No. But what about if you're a baseball player? You don't want to be sore. If you're sore and you're trying to hit a ball, it'll probably impede your ability to hit a ball. If you play baseball or softball, or you engage in any kind of high skill event, if you're high jumper, triple jumper, long jumper, throw the javelin, you don't want to be sore when you do those super high skill movements. Hey, branched chain amino acids might decrease soreness, but people, what's the caveat or the argument against it? People say, why don't you just do more protein? I'm like, yeah, you could do more protein, but they're not mutually exclusive. And I think people are always caught up on why can't you just do this? Yeah, you can just do that, but this is what's called a choice. You can do more protein, or you can do branched chain amino acids, or you could do both. There's nothing that says you have to do this and not this. There is one other for health, omega-3 fatty acids. Interestingly, I don't take supplements because I eat a lot of fish. So some of these things like omega-3 fats, vitamin D, I get it naturally. But people, if you live in Minnesota or Ohio, there's no freaking sun in Ohio for the people who are listening from Ohio. Or if you live in Seattle, there's no sun. Take vitamin D. And also, you're not going to be eating sushi if you live in Kansas, because that fish is already old by the time it gets to Kansas. If you're eating sushi or sashimi, make sure you live on the coast. The fish is fresh. Those are my go-tos for the most part.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm here in Missouri, so definitely take some vitamin D in the winter and try to supplement with omega-3s for sure. But I do sushi. I need to be careful with that. Maybe I need to go down to Florida and get some better sushi is what you're saying, basically.
Yeah, I would imagine the dude driving the truck with the fish in the back, I hope that's refrigerated really well when they deliver it to Missouri.
Hey, knock on wood, I haven't had any issues with it yet, but that could change at a moment's notice. So hopefully, but hey, also, if I like the sushi here, that just means that I would really love it if it was on the coast, right? Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing all that. All those, yeah, definitely are in line. I was surprised to hear a few, but like you said, you made a good rationale. And one of the ones, beta alanine, you mentioned, again, that's going to be more of like your kind of training that's going to be maybe a little bit longer in duration, not necessarily like powerlifting or something like that. Could you see a use for it in, say, like hypertrophy style training, or do you think that's where it's like in the middle there?
I think, yeah, if you're engaging in bodybuilding or resistance training, that is where the rest interval is short. And I know a lot of guys who do that. They'll do a set and then they rest maybe 15 to 20 seconds, and then they go back and do another set. Powerlifters don't do that, but I see physique people doing that quite a bit. I think that's where beta alanine could help, because it's going to help buffer that buildup of hydrogen ions. So by doing that indirectly, you'll be able to train harder. And by training harder, maybe it'll be easier to put on some lean mass. And there is some data, not a lot, but there's some data on beta alanine increasing lean body mass, but I think it's related primarily to the fact that it helps increase your ability to do work. There is one other supplement, which is interesting, and someone asked about this a week ago, HMB, hydroxymethylbutyrate. That's another one that gets its ass beat on social media. We're actually in the middle of putting together a position paper on HMB. And it seems, and this is where I hate it when people say supplements A, B, or C are useless, because there's always some nuance to that. Now, HMB, for someone who's a young male training, it may waste of time, right? But if you're an older male, let's say, or female, age 60 to 80, it might help. And in fact, a lot of the data is in older adults. So again, things that apply to someone who's 60 or older may not apply to someone who's 18 to 30. And that's where when people say, oh, HMB is a waste of time, it's not a waste of time. It really depends who you're talking to, the age group, the demographic, and what their goal is. It's just one of those things where on social media, I think people are really, they succumb to sound bites quite easily. And this is one I've seen on X or Twitter many times. It's 5% of supplements work, the other 95% are a waste of time. And I thought, those are specific numbers. I could think of 5 right off the top of my head that work: protein, creatine, caffeine, beta alanine, nitrates. I can't think of 95 supplements that do absolutely nothing. But that's the mentality on people on social media. They will just throw out these numbers and it's, wait a minute, are there even 95 supplements that people take that do absolutely nothing? And the answer obviously is a no.
Yeah, I think people are just throwing numbers out there. They really have no idea. I wonder too if it's like maybe a expectation thing around maybe the role of supplements, right? So for example, one that I can think of is like creatine, right? We talk about how great it is and there's a ton of research behind it. And then I think people hear that and they think it's going to be this like supplement that makes this like massive difference in like your physique. It's going to help, but it's okay. We got to be realistic here with how much it's actually going to help, right? It's a supplement, right? So I wonder if that's part of the issue too, and where it can get a bad rap.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. It's the issue of expectations. And creatine's a great example because if most of the data shows you might gain a couple kilos of it, maybe 3 kilos. But again, the studies tend to be fairly short term, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever, three months. The question is, what happens if you use it for years? No one knows the answer because no one's done the body composition analysis of people who've used it for years. Theoretically, what would you go by? We know creatine increases in levels of ATP and skeletal muscle. Okay, then that means it should increase your ability to your total work or total workload. Theoretically, if you can do more work over time, you should be able to accrue more skeletal muscle mass. Theoretically, no one's going to do the 1-year study or 2-year study or 3-year study. It's a lot of it now. It boils down to now it's trial and error. What do you find? What does your coach see? And things like that.
Yep. No, I think trial and error that's the way to go. And again, like you said, with these supplements, it's, hey, if it has a neutral to, again, like positive, it's like, why, it's no brainer. I'm assuming at that point, it's, hey, do you want to spend the money on that? And that's ultimately up to you as a consumer there. Cool. Yeah. Some of the supplements you brought up, you guys have written papers on, and I had a few I wanted to bring up with you, and we don't have to dive into every single question. What I like about how you guys do these is, so for example, the first one I want to talk about is the caffeine one. And it's common questions and sorry, I'm pulling it up.
Common questions and misconceptions.
Misconceptions. I love that because you guys go over the things that, like, I'm sure that you get frustrated that you see over the internet all the time. And there's a ton with the caffeine. And one that's really been coming up a ton is the kind of crash, right? Oh, hey, I need to wait X amount of time before I have caffeine because I'm going to get that crash. And so I'd love for you to explain that. I have a few other questions in here that I think are that I want to go over too, but that's the first one that I wanted to bring up here with the caffeine.
Okay, first of all, I want to tell a short story as to how we came up with the idea for these papers. So we created a series of papers called Common Questions and Misconceptions, and then we fill it in with whatever the supplement is. This actually harkens back to a conversation, an online conversation I had with Dr. Darren Candow. He does a lot of creatine research. He's at the University of Regina in Saskatchewan. Actually, I think he spends most of his time in British Columbia hanging out with his wife and hiking and stuff. But anyways, so we got in this conversation about, do you hear, this was on creatine, have you heard what this person says about creatine, that it does all of these bad things? I'm like, yeah, I hear that too. And he's like, how come we keep hearing the same stuff about how creatine is bad for you, whatever the issues are? I'm like, I don't know, it's really weird. So he actually came up with the concept of, why don't we do a Q&A format, which you don't really see in science?
No.
And have a common theme of common questions and misconceptions about creatine. So we came up with that. That was the very first one. And the one you just alluded to is caffeine, because again, there's a lot of issues with caffeine or questions about caffeine. So the two biggest things with caffeine, it dehydrates you. And the other one you bring up, which is really the funny one, is that you should wait up to 2 hours after waking up before you drink coffee or consume caffeine to avoid the afternoon crash. Now, it was Andrew Huberman that I heard that first from, and it started to get repeated by other people. And here's the problem. The first thing I thought is, that would be a really hard study to do, because people who drink coffee, I don't know many tea drinkers, but people who drink coffee never wait 2 hours to drink coffee in the morning.
I don't.
In fact, a lot of my friends are like, hell, I wake up, go to the bathroom, and I drink coffee. It's like a 5-minute break. I'm thinking, there's no way this study was ever done with coffee drinkers. So I looked. I'm like, I can't find a study on this. That's problem number one. Problem number two, the afternoon crash. Okay. One, if there's no study looking at coffee immediately after awakening versus 2 hours, then obviously we're not going to know if there's an afternoon crash. However, we all know some of us have an afternoon crash. Some of us take naps. I'm a big fan of naps, by the way. But oftentimes it's related to other things. Like, for instance, if I don't exercise in the morning, because I almost always train in the morning, I'm not tired at the end of the day. I'm just not tired because I haven't done shit. But if I work out really hard in the morning, God forbid, I want to fall asleep at about 3 p.m. And I drink coffee every day. So it's not a coffee thing. It's the fact that I worked out really hard. So this made the rounds on social media, and there's people like, oh my God, this is so great. Yeah, I'm not drinking my coffee. I'm waiting 1.5 to 2 hours, and this is the best thing ever. And I'm thinking, you fools. Part of it is a placebo effect. If you think you won't crash, then you won't crash. But the other thing is, let's assume this is somewhat true. Okay, I wait 2 hours, drink my coffee. Does that mean my crash happens 2 hours later? So there were so many problems with this, and the fact that people just believed it outright. And this is the problem with social media. people believed it outright. They're like, oh yeah, this makes perfect sense. And then when you think about it, the two things: one, you don't want to increase the amount of cortisol in the morning because you're already producing cortisol. And if you drink coffee or consume caffeine, it'll be even higher. Guess what? If you work out in the morning, cortisol also goes up. So are you saying I shouldn't train in the morning? What the hell should I do? So I wake up and I stare at the sun for 2 hours before I drink coffee. So this one was an odd one, because if you were to ask this question a year or two ago, people like, where would you get that? But because of social media, people started asking this question, and wait a minute, there's literally no study that's looked at this. And it would be semi-difficult to do because it's hard to convince caffeine consumers to wait 2 hours. But maybe if you paid them enough, they might wait 2 hours, and then they would probably gulp their coffee, So it's doable. In fact, this would be a nice master's thesis or maybe a dissertation, depending on how involved you want to get. But the fact that there's literally no data on it and it's based purely on a guess is the part that, in a way, it annoys me. It's, wow, I guess if you just make guesses and it sounds cool, say it on social media because there's always someone stupid enough to believe it. And that's where that came from. So I think it's been put to rest because people realize, okay, there's actually no data on this. So it's just made up. It's just made up based on some theoretical concept.
Wow. Okay. So there was no research whatsoever, no rationale behind it, just kind of something that maybe it was like a placebo, like somebody had, and then boom, it's got promoted, and then it just took off from there.
The main rationale was that it's when you wake up and you have higher levels of cortisol, that consuming coffee or caffeine in this case would further elevate it, right? But again, exercise does the same thing. Exercise, you'll elevate your cortisol. So on its face, it didn't even make sense. But the real kicker is there's not a single study that even supports this.
And I wonder too, if like part of it's for these people that, again, I love coffee. I feel like I get pretty good sleep. Like no matter what, I saw somebody post this. I think it was Menno Henselman, like posted the study about how you don't have to wait X amount of time. And I'm like, I put it on my story. I'm like, it wouldn't have mattered anyways. I still was going to have my coffee, whether this said that or not. I was still going to have it in the morning. Did I lose you? So I saw posts from Menno Henselman about basically debunking this kind of myth. And so I saw it and I was like, it wouldn't have mattered anyways. I put on my story. I still would have had my coffee anyways, but this is good to know. And obviously everyone else out there, you can have that coffee.
Hey, Jeff, you got muted on me.
But yeah, either way though, I was like, all right, it didn't matter anyways, but it was good to obviously hear that we could do that. Plus, because clients were bringing this up and I brought it up to them, I'm like, look, if you do this and you wait to have coffee and that makes you feel better, then by all means, go ahead and do that, right? If that's something that you feel makes you feel better, then go ahead and do that. But just don't think that it's because of the coffee in that situation. And plus, anytime people have an afternoon crash like that, I'm always like, okay, it's probably more of a sleep. To me, it's probably more of a sleep thing than anything, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think people who work desk jobs are the ones who have asked because they're so bored. Imagine if you were working 9 to 5. And so, oh my God, it's 3 o'clock. I got 2 more hours here. I'd want to crash too.
Cool. Yeah. So that was a big one. And then a couple other ones, the dehydration as well too. I think that's a big one. What did you guys find with that question?
Yeah, I think it comes from the idea that caffeine acts as a diuretic. And the preponderance of data shows that it really there's no significant effect on total body water. And I think this is most important during exercise because people are like, what if you consume something with caffeine while you work out? Well, you become dehydrated. No, because if you're consuming caffeine, the issues of dehydration just aren't there. The evidence isn't there. Now, I spoke to a urologist. This was many years ago, and he said there seem to be individuals whose bladders, he goes, I don't know why, but it gets irritated when they consume caffeine, and they have the sensation they want to go to the bathroom. And I would say, well, if that's the case, then I would just tell those people either cut back on caffeine a little bit or just don't consume caffeine if you feel like you have to go to the bathroom a lot. But other than that, again, that's an anecdote, and I won't dismiss it because that's based on him talking to patients saying, hey, caffeine or whatever irritates my bladder, makes me want to pee. But at the end of the day, when you're talking about people who exercise, the evidence for caffeine acting as a dehydrating agent, which means it would impede performance, just isn't there. But this is one of those myths where I think it hangs around a bit longer because people are like, when I drink coffee in the morning, I feel like I got to pee all the time. And part of that is, do you realize how much liquid you're drinking in the morning? Because a lot of people are completely unaware how much liquid they're drinking. They may have 2 mugs of coffee, which would be equivalent to 16 to 20 ounces of fluid. I'm like, yeah, you're probably going to want to pee because you're literally just drinking fluid, but it's not going to dehydrate.
Yeah, because I hear that all the time where it's, oh, I need to just drink more water. And it's, yeah, I think that's probably generally a good idea. But it's a lot of people think that if they don't drink water, it's like they're not hydrating. But it's, hey,
Yeah.
fluids in general can be helpful. And it sounds like with caffeine, say you have it through coffee or whatever it may be, it still is fluids. Would there be any tips you would give anybody? Hey, maybe that probably isn't, you probably don't want to just have caffeine as your only fluid consumption for the day. But yeah, something along those lines.
Well, it would be hard to convince a coffee drinker to consume something other than coffee in the morning. I think you'd get into a fist fight. I would say drink your coffee in the morning, and then for a snack or lunch or dinner, drink water. Or some people, like I actually like Diet Coke as a drink for dinner. For whatever reason, I like it for dinner, but not necessarily for lunch. I don't know why. I guess I'm weird. But yeah, I don't think replacing it with just water, because there are people who that's part of their advice. They're like, first thing you do when you get up in the morning, drink like 12 to 16 ounces of water. And I'm thinking, man, I don't want to drink 12 to 16 ounces. I just don't. And I always say, I'm a big believer. If you're going to give advice, most people think of it as, is it good advice? And will it do what you say it's going to do? I'm like, okay, that's one way to look at advice. The other piece of it should be, is it advice that people will adhere to? And if the answer to that is no, then shut up. Don't give that advice. I'm not going to wake up. I think I'm going to have 16 ounces of water today. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. I ain't going to do that. But I might have 16 ounces of coffee.
I will have the coffee though. Is this something where like caffeine, the kind of effects of it can wear off over time? What would that be called? Do you habituate to intake?
It doesn't seem to be. And in fact, because I've been consuming caffeine now for, God, 40 years or something, it doesn't seem to be. And if it does, and this is within the context of exercise, maybe if you just consume a little bit more pre-exercise or pre-race or pre-whatever you're doing, that can offset it a little. But for the most part, you don't really see that. Because some people have suggested, hey, before you do an event, go off caffeine for a couple of days or whatever. And I don't give that advice. Again, it goes back to the compliance issue, because one, you'll be grumpy as hell because you didn't get your coffee or tea or whatever. And if you're grumpy as hell, you're going to be grumpy those few days or that week prior to the event you're training for. And that's just not a good thing. You want people to be happy when they compete for whatever their sport is. Yeah, so that's my thoughts on that.
So you don't really see the need to like you said, hey, maybe before an event have a little bit more, but you don't really see the need to like, I guess periodize would be the right word, to where it's, hey, have periods of time where maybe you back off your caffeine intake, or you don't think that really impacts things? And again, we're talking specifically exercise here, but I'm assuming that probably translates over to just the effects of caffeine as well too, in a way.
Yeah, I don't see a reason to back off, because there's always an effect of backing off that you might not like. To me, if you're normally consuming, I think in the morning I might get on average 200 milligrams of caffeine based on the size of the cups I drink. If I was going to do a race, it's okay. Instead of 200 mgs, I'll just do 300 mgs, which 50% more. But is it really that much more? I don't know, 300 milligrams. And hopefully I would get an ergogenic effect. I've been known to consume 600 milligrams of caffeine pre-race. And I do stand-up paddling races here in Florida. 600 milligrams. Wow, that's a lot of caffeine for me.
Yeah.
Now, the funny part about that is 600 milligrams, I'm like wide awake, like all day. It's, oh my God. Because if you compete in a race or whatever you compete in, after you do it, you want to come down and just relax. But man, if you take 600 mgs of caffeine, or at least if I do, holy crap, that stuff's still floating around my blood.
And you do 600 at one time before?
Yeah, I take a 600 mgs. It's pills. I just get pills.
Gotcha.
Take it 30 minutes before a race, and then here's the reason I take it, and this is why I love caffeine. I take it because if you do any kind of racing, I think the hardest thing to do is keep your brain from getting tired. And the goal with that is, I don't want my brain to quit on me. As long as my brain isn't tired, I can push myself and take a lot of pain. But once my brain's, yeah, you're done, then it's like, I'm done. And that's what I'm trying to avoid.
Gotcha. Yeah. So it can help, offset that fatigue of that. Yeah. What, would you say there's any downsides to caffeine? I'm sure there's a point to where it's okay, now you're consuming a little bit too much. Was this maybe just a case by case in terms of the person, in terms of the potential downsides of too much
I think
caffeine?
it would be case by case. Within the context of exercise, not really. Again, it's a dosing issue and a case by case. Within the context, of health, certainly pregnant women probably shouldn't. Kids, this is a tricky one. If you're under 18, should you be consuming caffeine or an energy drink? And this is where it gets tricky, because, okay, if you're 17, a lot of people are almost full-grown adults. Will it really affect you differently than when you're 18? Does something magical happen between 17 and 18? I don't know. And this is where I always push it off to the parents. It's okay, your kid who's a wrestler in high school, 17 years old, wants to do an energy drink before a wrestling meet. I personally don't think there's anything wrong with that, because he's probably going to do it anyways. And as long as you supervise the dosage, it probably isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah. Again, watch the dosage, right? That's a big thing there,
Yeah.
making sure. Obviously, they down what 2 bangs. That's like what 400 milligrams of
I think, isn't a bang 300 mgs per
probably
can?
something around that. Yeah.
So
Which
two is 600.
which is crazy because back in the day when they first had all these energy drinks come out, if you look like the Red Bulls and the Monsters, they're like what, like 80 to
Nothing.
150. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy. And now then the pre-workouts started coming out, and now it's man 400 milligrams at one time. That's pretty crazy.
I'm glad you brought up Red Bull because that's obviously the most popular energy drink. But I tell people a lot, Red Bull is actually underdosed.
Yeah.
I'm really surprised how people think Red Bull could potentially be harmful. I'm like, coffee has a lot more caffeine than Red Bull. To me, Red Bull doesn't do anything unless I drink 2 cans of it. But it's weird that people have this thing, oh, Red Bull's bad. I'm like, there's not much of anything in Red Bull. What are you talking about?
It does give you wings though, so that you have that.
Fly, man.
I do fly. But yeah, no, then it's okay if you take two. Now that's $8, $10 for your caffeine dosage there. So not the
Yeah,
most
really.
cost effective. Better to do coffee. One of the downsides too that I can think of would be from like and this is again, I'm sure it's a case by case basis, but for me, it's like from an anxiety standpoint. Once like the more I have, that's something where it's you can maybe feel a little bit more jittery. And at the end of the day, I do feel that where sometimes anxiety can be a little bit higher. Just like again, just like feeling restlessness the more I have.
What dosing are you talking?
I probably have about 2 to 3 of these a day. Sometimes on the days that I really feel it's now we're looking at 4.
Oh, that's a lot.
So I'm sure that probably is plays a big role in it is the dosage, how much you have overall. And then sleep, right? I'm assuming that's another one where you do want to be careful with that as well too, in terms of your timing and everything.
No, I'm glad you brought that up because that's one of the reasons I avoid caffeine after about 12 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon, because otherwise it screws up my sleep. Yeah.
And hey, this again probably comes back to what we talked about where like people will have it at 4 or 5 and then now they don't get good sleep and then they have coffee first thing in the morning and then they get the afternoon crash. But is it the caffeine? So
lack of sleep. Yeah.
Cool. Well, was there anything else from that paper that you found interesting or anything like that?
No, I think caffeine's one of my all-time favorite ergogenic aids. I'd say caffeine and creatine are my top 2 just because there's so much data on both. And I think for both supplements, they help really the spectrum of athletics, people in the strength power side, people on the endurance side, and everyone in between. So you can't go wrong with either of those.
Speaking of creatine, you guys also did one on creatine. Is there maybe a few questions that you feel like are the big kind of misconceptions around creatine that you want to settle here?
One of the funnier ones, and Darren Candow and I, we laugh about it because we both are bald, is does creatine make you lose your hair? And Darren and I are like, maybe they should ask someone else this because they're not going to believe us.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, that's one of the ones. Here's the thing about, okay, if it made you bald, okay, the follow-up question I ask is, what food has the highest concentration of creatine? Typically it's fish, right? What country consumes the most fish by far in the world? Japan. I think that island nation consumes 20% of the world's fish. Think about that. 20% of the world's fish is consumed by the Japanese. One would suspect that the entire island nation of Japan would be full of bald people. In fact, I would guess, and I've only been to Japan once, most Asian people are not bald when they get old. And you don't see baldness in Japan. It's no different than anyone else, is my guess. So that's one of the funnier ones. The other one, which is it's actually we're doing a part 2 of this, so you'll like that. In fact, it's under review right now, is the dosing. How much do you take creatine, Jeff? What dose do you take a day?
About 5 milligrams.
Okay. Grams, you mean, not milligrams.
Or 5 grams, yeah.
I take 3 because I take capsules. I don't use powder. But anyways, so 3 to 5 grams typically you could as the maintenance dose. It's entirely possible that dose is good for skeletal muscle, which is why we take it. But what about the brain? And this is where it gets tricky. And this, again, I'm giving credit to Darren Candow. He's the one who proposed that maybe if you want to help the brain, you need a higher dose. And that higher dose is 10 grams a day. And I said, I ain't doing 10 grams a day, Darren. Again, it's one of those things. Will I adhere to it or comply to it? I'm like, no, I'm used to my 3 or 4 pills a day. I've been doing it forever. I'm not going to consume 10 pills or whatever. But we think that creatine dosing depends on which body tissue that you're interested in. But then I flipped the question. I said, okay, if it's 10 grams a day, what if you took 3 grams a day for 20 years? Would that be enough? And the answer is, we don't know. Now, I don't know how many years you've been doing it, Jeff, but if you've been doing 5 grams for many years, I would imagine you've been doing it long enough that you will elevate creatine levels in the brain, which is good for the brain. It helps memory, helps protect it against traumatic brain injury and whatnot. So that's one of the ones where it's really getting interesting is, okay, I and all the people who've done creatine research have been saying 3 to 5 grams. That's all you need, 3 to 5 grams. Now it's like, maybe we need more than 3 to 5 grams. Or here's the other one. Maybe we should treat it as a conditionally essential nutrient, meaning, like, for instance, glutamine is conditionally essential, meaning under times of severe stress, you might need more of it, but otherwise, most people make enough of it. Creatine, technically, you don't need it, but it seems to do so many good things for you that we should maybe treat it as conditionally essential. And that's a new thing. If you go back 5 or 6 years, we didn't really think of it that way, but from a science standpoint, that's new. It gives a new avenue of research. And it's interesting how it's evolved because what year were you born, Jeff?
91.
Oh, this is hilarious. Okay. I was doing my PhD. I graduated in 1993, but I was on a radio show. In fact, in Dallas. I was in Dallas at the time. And I was a guest, but also I hosted it when the main guy was out of town. He's like, hey, could you fill in for me? I'm like, sure. So I don't know the exact year, but it might have been 1991. I said, hey, Larry, his name's Larry North. He had this radio show. I'm like, I'm going to talk about this thing called creatine. I just read about it in a paper, and it seems like it does some cool stuff in muscle. He's like, yeah, bring it in. Let's talk about whatever it is, because, no one had really heard of it. And so that's the year you were born. We talked about creatine. And then research started to trickle out how it helps skeletal muscle. And so everyone focused on muscle, which is good because everyone's interested in muscle. But now it's shifting over towards health. How does it help health? And it seems there's a running joke amongst the scientists who do work in this area. They're like, is there anything creatine doesn't do? And that's where it's really weird is, whoa, this nutrient has so many positive effects that it seems really strange. It helps your brain, helps skeletal muscle, and might help memory and things like that. It's interesting from a personal standpoint, but also a scientific standpoint. So that's one of the things that we're learning about creatine supplementation.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Like you said, the brain side of things, the cognitive side of things, I think that's super, super interesting. And that's awesome. And like you said, we don't know if it's, hey, you probably want to take a little bit more, but does taking it for extended periods of time also help with that?
Yeah.
Which, like you said, that's really hard to study there. And it's funny because, man, creatine, that's one where it's been touted as, when I was younger, it was like, oh, you don't want to take creatine. It's a steroid, which you guys go over, I believe. And you guys have a ton of other awesome, like, kind of questions that you asked there with that in terms of the loading phase. So again, always want to push people to look at this. One interesting thing that I heard was, and I wonder if you have any thoughts on this, is creatine with like sleep loss. Like it can be a good thing to maybe help offset some sleep loss potentially, or taking it during that period of time may help offset some of that.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. In fact, that research, the original research goes back many years where they took sleep deprived individuals, and the ones who took creatine versus placebo did better on various cognitive tests. In fact, I tell college students this all the time. I'm like, I know you guys don't get any sleep. And then you come here and you bitch about how tired you are, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, take some creatine. Even if you're not a bodybuilder, we know that, but it's going to help your brain deal with the sleep restriction or sleep deprivation you have, but also maybe it'll help your memory and you'll do better in exams. But that's a good one. I'm glad you brought that up because that's one of the few. We know sleep is important for recovery and health. And if you impair sleep, hey, maybe creatine can offset that. Also, what else will offset that? Exercise.
Yeah.
But to a point, you can't just not sleep for 3 days and think exercising creatine will reverse it. But yeah, it's great for that. If you're sleep deprived, creatine is definitely good.
Like you said there, it's not like that. You don't want to rely on that. But if you know you're going to have times of poor sleep, so like, for example, we're having our first child here in about a month, and it's like, all right, I'm taking creatine for sure during that. I would have taken it anyways, but I'm definitely taking it for sure during
You better
that
give
time.
your wife high doses.
You're getting 25 grams. Or as I said, milligrams, right? Cool, Dr. Antonio. Really appreciate your time. Want to be respectful of it. Anything coming up on your end that you want to let the audience know about? And then where can they find you?
Yeah, information on me. It's easiest to, one, I want to promote my conference. Go to ISSN.net. We're always in Florida hosting our national conference. On social media, it's probably easiest to find me on X, formerly known as Twitter. It would be just under Jose Antonio, PhD. That's also the easiest way to reach me if you want to send me a direct message and whatnot. But this fall, we're doing a couple studies, one on ashwagandha, another one on a caffeine versus non-caffeinated, basically bottled or canned coffee. I'm not a fan of canned coffee, but I figure, hey, what the hell, let's do a study on it. So we're doing that. And then I'm always open to any new projects. So if you know anyone who needs a study done, I can do it. So yeah, I appreciate you having me on the show. Let me know when you post it and I'll help share it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Looking forward to all the papers that come out and continuing to see your work. And like I said, hopefully I can get out to the ISSN conference here in the next one of the next couple ones. So again, appreciate your time and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.